The second topic is what is decision optimization and DEOS, how it solves issues across the M&A process, and why it makes get started right away. So today's industry is totally different from what we experienced in the past in terms of complexity when we look at supply chains, uncertainty when we look at new technologies, regulation, macroeconomics, and in terms of speed when we look at how short are cycles or product life cycles and time to market. Just to give you a perspective on that, the complexity of what we call the management game, which is basically operating as a decision maker, as an executive in an organization. The game of Go, which is by far the most complex strategic game that is available in the world, has a complexity of 10 to the power of 172. That means basically like what are the different possibilities there. If we look at the average supply chain in the US, we already end up with 10 to the power of 1,180, which shows the insane complexity of things moving, things are being connected. The second challenge that we see is related to uncertainty about future returns. And this is basically showing up in the fact that the majority of enterprise value in the S&P 500 and also in other companies, especially in startups, is intangible and lies in an unknown future. This is, for instance, when it comes to new technologies, patents, or also future revenue or intangibles like the user base that you have in your organization. And finally, when it comes in terms of how fast things change and how fast basically revenue and organizations grow. When we look at different companies, how long it took them to basically move to 100 million users. With LinkedIn, it was more than 7 years. With Telegram, it was 5 years. With TikTok, it was just 9 months. ChatGPT was 2 months, and before already, this is totally crazy. And Mark Zuckerberg's new social media Threads needed just 5 days to get 100 million users. And the same is also true when we look into not just consumer products, but more enterprise-oriented products. How long does it take from 1 million to 100 million in revenue? So ServiceNow was a benchmark a few years ago with not even 6 years. Slack also showed an extreme pace with more than 2 years, and the HR software deal now just needed 1.5 years. So the big question for any organization is how can we navigate this level of uncertainty in this business world? How can we build digital customer experiences? How can we outcompete on global markets? How can we master supply chain disruptions? Or also how will resilient business models look like in the future? And how can we grow into these business models? However, we see that when we address those kind of questions with strategic initiatives, it's simply not work, consulting, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations. But the failure rate that we see in those initiatives, and this is the averages across all industries, from 40% when it comes to R&D, all the way up to 85% of not realized value or value totally destructed through M&A activities. So what's the reason for that? The first reason that we see in organizations that hinders basically a better way of decision making is related to the process. Most organizations don't have this well-defined playbooks, for instance, for M&A initiatives. They don't have predefined decision criteria or processes and are very opportunistic in the process, which hinders successful serial M&A activities. And indeed, like 2/3 of executives are not satisfied with their decision making. The second issue that we have comes back to complexity about data and information. So what we try to do here is, typically in M&A, we want to represent a company in some way. So what we use is balance sheet, income statements, sometimes even on an annual basis, and just for the last 3 years. However, the reality is totally different. This simplification is just too much. And on the right side of the screen, you can see an example of a target company with just a few products. And we already see how the complexity of business units, different initiatives of the target are exploding. So this way of oversimplification does not actually help us to have a complete picture of the target in M&A. The next problem we have is related to technology and tools that we use. The tools that we use, typically driven by spreadsheets, are not able to capture unstructured data, to capture non-linear relationship, and to capture non-normal distributions. And in the end, we don't want to work with averages. We want to actually find the outliers that bring the biggest return. So we need to have tools that can deal with this kind of world and environment. And breaking this down to the average M&A transaction size, which is 364 million in the last year, and we just take the average across industries of failure rate, we have 309 million at risk for the average M&A transaction. And in principle, you can calculate for yourself, like for your annual budget that you do in M&A, how much you have at risk. But I'm pretty sure you will end up with a number that shows it's worth considering a different way of approaching this. That's why we believe the future lies in decision optimization. Decision optimization, and DEOS, the decision optimization system, is a way of transforming information into better business outcomes by augmenting management decisions with AI. This means for us, on the one hand, streamlining the process with decision templates that are structured and standardized across the organization, connecting internal and external data, automating insight generation and data analysis with AI, and then using these unique insights to augment decisions all across the way, from the business analyst to the manager, all the way up to the executive who makes the final choice. Decision optimization specifically has like 4 different parts. First, designing templates, then connecting information, automating predictions, and then fusing everything together so it addresses concrete decisions. What is a decision template in this sense? You can think of it like a digital version or a software version of your M&A playbook. It holds the information that we need about the recommendation that we want to make. What are the dimensions that we want to look at it? Like, for instance, the strategic fit, the pure financial value, the risks involved, the synergies, or also the attractiveness to our core business. From there, we can basically deduct the business questions that we need to get answers for, like what is the profitability of the target, how is it evolving, and so on. We then can break this further down to the measures, how we measure things, to make sure they are also standardized across use cases, because we want, and across also targets, because we want to be able to compare them in the future. And then we need the technical backbone, which is what kind of data and data models are required, what kind of algorithms, and what are the workflows that take us there. And using this approach allows us to get started with decisions like with a project, with a single click from the template, and then follow and monitor the progress of this decision over time, while the decision template itself guides us through the process like a playbook that always tells us like what's the next step to do, and basically run the relevant analysis and collect and manage the relevant data. So when we talk about data, we always think of it from 4 different angles. The first is ecosystem data, the second operational data, expert knowledge, and experience data. Looking at ecosystem data, what does it mean? So ecosystem data for us is everything that is happening around your organization. For instance, macroeconomic conditions, financial markets, new patterns coming up, competitive actions, news in the market, or also financial benchmarks, regulatory requirements, and for instance, new research results that just come up. So for that purpose, we provide you with the capability, and we think it's crucial to be easy accessible and searchable, so you can just access the data that is required for your specific context. Moving to the next data source that we need is operational data. So looking, for instance, in the due diligence phase at a target, we want to have a way to represent the target, as we said, in data. And we want to do this by not using your existing financial statements and balance sheets, but actually building it bottom up and on the level of granularity that we need. So we want to have, and that this is what we provide there. It's like, think of it like a semantic data room that actually represents the target company in its business model structure. What are the solutions? What are the markets? What are technologies? How do they result in revenue? And what is, for instance, the investment structure and the capital structure of the target? So we can have a way to really build all the calculations afterwards bottom up and model the actual business and the business mechanics of the target. The next thing that we want to take a look at is expert knowledge. So on top of the data that we have from outside and inside the target, basically, we want to use the expert knowledge that we have inside our organization. For instance, from our specialized departments on R&D, like what's the fit of the technology, or from our sales department, what's the level of synergies that we have with our product portfolio, and also assumptions about future development and growth. For that, we provide an infrastructure so you can basically use standardized questions to collect this information, and then we use algorithms to aggregate them in the background so you can leverage the collective intelligence of your organization in a structured way, while aggregating all this heterogeneous knowledge, but also reducing the bias of single individuals. Like, let's say I have a strong assumption about extremely high growth rates. You don't want to build like your future analysis on just this one assumption that might be off, but you want to basically get as rich as possible picture. And finally, also the topic of experience data. And this is basically the subjective and also very soft factors that are often the why behind many financial numbers. Think of, for instance, customer satisfaction, because this is, in the end, if you buy a target, you want to buy satisfied clients, because those will in the end drive your future revenue and your future growth. And the same is true for employees. So you don't want to acquire a target where half of the workforce is leaving. And we saw that even with a $80 billion dollar company like OpenAI, if suddenly like 60 or 70% of the workforce say, well, if this doesn't happen, we are gone, then you have a serious trouble. Now that we have all this different information connected together, we can automate different analysis on this data. For instance, we use always out-of-the-box AI engines that are pre-trained, so you don't have any risk in terms of developing own models or training or figuring out if it even works. But we make sure that it just works out of the box. For that purpose, we automate, for instance, market analysis, the search for targets, commercial and financial due diligence, valuation, simulation of synergies, or the optimization of the portfolio. Concretely speaking, it means that, for instance, we can take a look at your existing business and see what are the white spots in our existing business model portfolio, what are the main value drivers that define the returns of the overall organizations, and how do they perform. We can also rank different targets depending on their fit to the organization, taking into account different dimensions based on a short list of targets that you can simply search. On top of that, we can analyze, for instance, the historic performance of the target and benchmark it with the competition. Because in the end, let's say a specific R&D turnover, where we can see here, for instance, in an automotive company that is declining, there is the question like, is this just because the company is bad, or are there also other factors like market-related factors? And that's why we always use this and compare it with similar companies to have always a score, a standardized score of, or rank how specific value drivers perform. The same we can do for the future, forecasting different parts, different value drivers of the target and benchmarking it with future expected performance of other companies. And based on that, we can run valuations like discounted cash flow methods or also multiple-based methods to calculate the expected or the probability distribution of expected cash flows. And here on the right, you can see this is from the automotive company Vitesco, actually, the value of per share. And you see that the distribution is not normal. So the mean is not very meaningful in this sense. So you want to understand the actual distribution of outcomes to make an informed decision. And now when we do, for example, this M&A decisions, we end up typically with a few hundred of different insights and questions that are answered. And now we want to aggregate all of them up so they address a concrete decision. We do this so we can merge the scores from different perspectives. Like, let's say we look at the attractiveness, the risk, and the financial value. And we say each of them votes for if the acquisition for this price that we have is a good idea for me or not. And based on that, we can come up with a very simple number and a very simple recommendation. But now you will probably say, yeah, but you come up with this number. How should I trust this? For that purpose, we provide the capability to navigate down in what we call decision graphs that basically represent the cause and effect relationship that lead to this outcome. So you can navigate them the whole level down. Let's say, for instance, you want to understand how you come up with the financial value, how this basically exists from discounted cash flow, and then navigating all the way down how the R&D effectiveness of the target is driving this return and this cash flows. And this approach of using decision optimization for M&A helps us to move from this inefficient ad hoc processes and one-time understanding. Like most organizations that we see and that we work with do this on a case by case. So, which is perfectly fine for this specific case, but in the end, you want to have a way to compare across cases, to reuse assets that you create, and to foster continuous learning across time and across the whole organization. It also helps us to move from this very incomplete picture that we have. And to be honest, like it will always be incomplete because there's no way to capture the whole world in data. This is what everyone would have or would want to have. But what we do there is getting a more complete real-time picture on the level of granularity that we want. Can be on the level of a whole company, 10 business units, or 20,000 products, doesn't matter. It also allows us to move from this very slow and costly data analysis process. So just read the average duration for from basically identifying a target, moving the whole due diligence process to then signing a deal is currently around 9.4 months. And to speed up this process by automating predictions at any scale and then also generating unique insights from that. And this allows executives not just to reduce risk for a single transaction, but also building their internal competitive advantage, internal decision intelligence for M&A by having a platform where you basically can collect the data, store the data, the analysis and insights created. And mapping this to concrete numbers, based on our experience of being able to reduce risk by around 36% and also efficiency gains of around 37%. This means that with the average M&A transaction, you can, by using decision optimization, you can basically gain more than 100 million through productivity gains, faster time to market, risk reduction, and the soft factor of future transactions as a competitive advantage. So what are, for instance, use cases? We try to support this with, as I said, with templates, which allows us to basically have dedicated templates for different phases of the M&A process. From M&A strategy, answering questions like, should we enter this field? And is an acquisition a good way to do so? To target screening, which target should we consider? To the transaction phase, should we acquire the target for the price? And then also post-merger integration and divestiture, for instance, how should we allocate resources to leverage synergies, or where are maybe parts of the organization that we no longer need and should basically sell? So we believe it's never too early to get started with the topic. And depending on your level of maturity, there can be different points of getting started. However, you should always think of the value that you can achieve with that, and then basically start by use case discovery phase, where it's more about identifying what are basically friction points in our organization in the M&A process, where we can gain more value by using technology. The second phase is about standardizing and formalizing decision-making processes, developing playbooks, and developing a shared set of material that organization can use across use cases. And the next phase is then using really AI and decision optimization on a case-by-case basis. So on a project-by-project basis. And then what's the long-term goal? Where you want to go is in the stage where you use enterprise-wide decision optimization. So basically not just your M&A process, but also other corporate development activities run on the same platform, so you can always learn and you build this intelligence that is shareable. Our approach to get you started here is we have a Get Started in 40 Days program, which helps through our standardized approach and our templating approach from basically kickoff to going live in just 40 days. And the advantage for you there is that it's very fast to explore if decision optimization brings value to your M&A process, and also see it in action pretty fast. So if you found this topic interesting, feel free to reach out to schedule a personal call where we can make a deep dive into specific use cases, demo in specific use cases, and explore the business value that decision optimization can bring for your M&A process.